Hi, so I'm a senior ecologist with Bush Heritage Australia, and I'm presenting on behalf of our team that are doing this work collaboratively across 3 Bush Heritage Conservation Reserves in the Midwest region of WA. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this unceded land where we're meeting, the Whadjuk Noongar people, and of the land where we work, the Mulgana, Nunda and Badimaya peoples, and I pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all First Nations people here today. I respectfully acknowledge the work that traditional owners throughout Australia who care for country sustainably for tens of thousands of years. Now, nature faces many threats. Bush Heritage's purpose is to return the bush to good health, and we take a holistic approach to ecosystem restoration. We work in connected landscapes to enhance ecosystem function. We work to understand the species and the ecosystems that we're protecting and support population growth of native species and minimise the impacts of threats, including introduced species. Following on from managing goats, integrated rabbit, fox and feral cat management is a current focus on these 3 reserves. These species are all recognised nationally as major threats to many of Australia's threatened species, especially rabbits, which are considered a threat to over 300 threatened species. Effective rabbit control has potential for very wide-ranging benefits for soil health and native plant species that in turn benefit native animal species and whole ecosystems. Effective rabbit control also has the potential to reduce fox and feral cat populations in areas where rabbits provide food for them and help their populations grow. Because it's very difficult to effectively control feral cat populations, it's worth using as many approaches as possible, as we're hearing repeatedly, to try to reduce their impacts on native animals. So Tim Doherty began an annual ground baiting trial with Eradicate in 2013 on Charles Darwin Reserve that Bush Heritage continued through to 2019. Then, from 2020, we expanded to include 2 more reserves in the region, and we've integrated rabbit control with Eradicate ground baiting and increased the rate to twice a year. In 2020, we had a licensed contractor do a round of trapping and shooting across all 3 reserves. And then in 2022, in collaboration with DBCA, we trialled a round of aerial baiting with Eradicate to increase the density of baiting at Uradi, which backs onto Kalbarri National Park. Unfortunately, none of these have been particularly effective. So we were keen to test Felixers that don't depend on cat interest in food sources when they're not hungry. As an example of the results that we've had from Eradicate baiting so far, I'm just going to show you this exploratory plot that shows data associated with the recent trial adding aerial baiting to integrated ground baiting at Uradi. So each of the reserves has about 40 monitoring cameras. 20 of them are within the area that's baited and 20 of them are in an unbaited reference area. So we didn't find any decrease in cat activity after the aerial baiting, and the seasonal trends were really similar to cameras in the unbaited reference area. If anything, the differences were actually looking the opposite of what we were aiming for. So I was actually really encouraged by Alistair's talk about the central rock rats, that it's potential that this might work, because we haven't had much luck so far. So recent years have seen boom conditions after the big rains associated with the cyclone. So maybe it's not surprising that baiting wasn't effective, given that cats probably had abundant live prey. Also, July in the rainy season is when baiting is done, and the aerial baiting is done in that area, and it is probably also the time of year when prey are abundant in the semi-arid zone. So back to the Felixers, they are very costly, but they're less labour intensive than traditional trapping and shooting and more target specific than traditional baiting methods. The risk assessment and permit process is exhaustive, as you would expect, with using lethal methods. It took us 12 months to complete, and so we deployed 2 units in the middle of last year. So these are really very, very early results. Our strategy is to target hotspots of feral cat activity identified by a network of remote monitoring cameras that we also use to evaluate the outcomes of management. So in the photo trials on the 3 reserves, we found that 45% of cat detections by the Felixers were recognised as targets. These plots show the number of cat detections that were recognised as targets in red and those not identified as targets in blue in each successive week of the trials from the date that the deployment started in each of those photo-only trials. So the grey bars show when the units were not active. The trial sites at Hamlin Reserve, which are in the bottom panel, had both high numbers of detections and also a high proportion of those detections recognised as targets. So we decided to start the live deployments there after we got approvals. So far, the two Felixers between them have targeted 16 feral cats at 5 sites, representing 31% of the cat detections. Note that we haven't gone to that extra step yet of identifying individuals, so I'm talking about percentages of detections. If the same cat's walking past over and over again, then you're potentially picking it up later on. So what about non-target impacts? The majority of the animals that were targeted were feral cats, but the other 3 species that were targeted were consistent with the previously published results from Felixers, which is incrementally changing, as John highlighted yesterday. So foxes are part of our management program, so that was a good outcome. Targeting young dingoes was an undesirable outcome for us, so we moved the Felixers to different locations as soon as we did that check, and we will take extra steps to avoid this in the future. Mallee fowl are highly resistant to 1080, so the Felixer dose is about 1/20th of a lethal dose, but we will still try to avoid Mallee fowl hotspots in future deployments. So the next question is our strategy of targeting hotspots of feral activity based on our monitoring cameras worthwhile? It's a really labour-intensive approach, and so some of our hotspots weren't actually that hot, but that gives us a little bit of power to test this. So it is too early to tell. That's not a significant effect, but the next successive deployments should give us a better picture. So are Felixers reducing overall feral cat activity levels at these sites? So these plots show data from the monitoring cameras that have been running continuously. Just at the first 2 sites where we deployed the Felixers live, we've only got 2 Felixers, so the subsequent deployments didn't have any post-deployment monitoring yet. So in the month before the Felixers were deployed, the light blue bars, there were more than 10 feral cat detections. During the Felixer deployments, the orange bars, detections stayed high in that first month after activation. Then we had a battery problem at site 61, so the Felixer was only active for that 1 month. After that, the monitoring camera did detect more cats, but at lower numbers than before, possibly a seasonal effect. And then at site 76, where the camera was active for the full 2-month deployment, feral cat detections on the monitoring camera were low in the second half of the deployment, but then bounced back up again after the deployment ended, so a little bit similar to the previous talk. It's still really early days yet, so watch this space. Our next steps are to test how long any effect lasts for more successive deployments, so whether there are site differences in how quickly cat activity bounces back. Some of the previous things have also suggested we should leave our Felixers out in the same location for a bit longer and hide them better. So it's nice hearing other people sharing their experience. We will also look at activity on neighbouring cameras in the monitoring network. So they spread about 2 kilometres apart to see if there's any detectable impact further afield. And then finally, because natural seasonal increases and decreases in cat activity can make it actually quite hard to figure out what effects are attributable to management, we're going to compare the changes before and after Felixer deployments at sites with and without Felixers to see if there's more of a decrease or less of an increase in cat activity at the Felixer sites than at the non-Felixer sites. This project wouldn't be possible without a massive amount of support from a wide range of people and organisations providing funding, help with processing a lot of camera trap images, and facilitating trials of the different feral cat control methods. So we're hugely appreciative of that support. And thank you very much.